I think we're ready to go.
All right.
Alrighty. Excellent. Woo. We got this. We got this. Hello. Hello, everybody tuning in on Twitch. We are excited today to kick off a new chapter of Waypoint Coffee Corner. This is my brother, James Wiley.
Hey, hey, what's up,
Hey,
everybody?
what's up, James? I'm going to give just like the quick rundown of what we're doing here uh, at Waypoint and what we're doing here on Twitch. And then uh, we'll get into your story, all right?
Yes, sir.
Cool, cool, cool. So basically, what is Waypoint? We are a youth outreach in downtown La Mesa. We are a part of La Mesa Village Church. We are the youth ministry of La Mesa Village Church. And uh, ever since COVID started and everything, one of the things God has put on my heart is to start this coffee corner, so to speak. What is this? This is I found in ministry that it's really helpful to have discussions with people and to listen to voices and to hear people. And often for me, as someone who really enjoys coffee, uh, that often is at a coffee shop in the corner. So with COVID-19 and everything, I haven't been able to do this so much. So
Yeah.
we're starting. We started this when COVID started, calling it Waypoint Coffee Corner, uh, and we're hanging out today. We're taking the first step of many to talk about things that are going on in our nation. We intend on doing this, if everything gets resolved, with racism and the system here in America. We intend on continuing to talk about culturally appropriate things in light of the gospel,
Yeah.
and that's our goal. Our goal is to talk to people and have these conversations. So, um, this is James Wiley. This is a man who, ironically, our paths crossed when I was in high school. Um, for those of you who don't know my story, I went to a small little school that used to be a part of Horizon, and then it was their own school called H Town down in southeast San Diego.
hmm
That's where I went to for high school. H Town had a connection with a gym called Lord's Gym down off of
Yeah.
Euclid and the 94. And and it was funny. James and I were at a retreat back in October, and we're talking about and sharing our stories and that type of stuff. And he's like, "Wait, Lord's Gym? You used to go to Lord's Gym because I used to work there." And I was like, "Yeah, I was one of the kids who take up your basketball court." uh, our paths crossed a long time ago. Most recently, and in a ministry setting, our paths crossed. Uh, we are both employees of UIC, which is Urban Youth Collaborative. It's a large organization here in San Diego. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people haven't heard of it. Uh,
hmm
Basically, what UIC is it's an on-campus ministry that helps support faith clubs in San Diego junior highs and high schools. And when I say help support, there's so many things that go into it.
Yeah.
Whether it's the finances of bringing pizza, whether it's keeping connections with the school and the different admins, whether it's helping look for new connections and all these different things. Um, and so James has been with UIC for much longer than I have.
Yeah.
I've been a pastor partner since 2000. I think it was 15, but it could have been 16, something like that. But he's been on staff with UIC, and I went on staff in September 2019. James has been on staff for over 5 years, right?
Yeah. I came on staff in 2013. So it's been about good 7 years. But prior to that, I became a volunteer with Urban Youth Collaborative in 2007, helping out with Bible clubs in Southeast, Lincoln High School, Gompers,
Mm-hmm.
and Morris at that time. So it's been a while, been a long ride in life.
2007. You've been volunteering
Yeah.
with. That is pre
Yep.
Project 25. That is pre
Yeah.
all these big things
Yeah.
that we've been doing. So you've been around for a while.
Yep. We
Oh,
have.
awesome, man. Uh, God's brought you into my life, and it's been super great. I appreciate. I still think of that time when we were at that retreat and we're both sitting in that van and just like, wait, our paths crossed here and our paths crossed there, and
Right.
like all this type of stuff. And I've gained a huge respect for you, brother,
Appreciate it.
and
Appreciate it.
I'm excited to hear your story and discuss honestly what is a incredibly difficult,
Yeah.
complex issue here in America today,
Yeah.
emotionally charged,
Mhm.
and so on and so forth. So, uh, let's do this. I want to just give you the floor. Like I in a lot of ways. At the same time, I also want to help people know some of the things about you that I know about you. Um,
Okay.
uh, so could you just before we get into your story and everything that's pertains to that, could you just tell us a little bit like what are the important details about you today? Like James Wiley, born and raised where, family,
Right. Gotcha.
kids, all that type of stuff. And
Yeah, for
then
sure.
one thing I do want to say, and I'll say this throughout our discussion. Really, it's not even really an interview. I just want to give you the place to talk. Um, but for those who are in the Twitch chat, feel free to post questions, and at the end we'll have a little bit of a Q&A and just kind of if things weren't addressed. So please post questions in the Twitch chat, and and then we'll field them at the end. So um, back to James. James,
All right.
what's like the snapshot of you?
All right. So I am 39, 38 years old. Be 39 in August.
Alrighty.
Born and raised right here in Southeast San Diego. Um, I am married. Been married for it'll be 14 years in August. My wife Danielle, and we have two kids. Jay Sean, who's 14, and Jair, who is 8. Who both attend school in this community. Jay Sean is in ninth grade, going to 10th grade, and he goes to Gompers Preparatory Academy. And then Jair goes to Winter Park Elementary. He is in third grade, going to fourth grade. I am a graduate from Lincoln High School. Graduated there in '99. Went to a private school, St. Stephen's, right here in the community, from preschool all the way up until ninth grade, and then played sports all my life. So being that St. Stephen's didn't have a sports team, a high school team, and I played football and basketball, I needed to go to a school that provided that because I needed to play. So my dad allowed me and my siblings to go to Lincoln, and so graduated in '99. Then I got involved in youth ministry with Young Life in 2000, and volunteered with them from 2000 all the way up until 2000, the end of 2012, and then 2013 at the very beginning is when I came on staff with Young Life as well. So I came on staff with Young Life and Our Youth Collaborative at the same time. I was a volunteer with them both simultaneously, and both of the directors of those ministries, saw my heart. They knew that I had a calling on my life for full-time youth ministry, and they figured out a way to bring me on staff. And then recently, I started my own nonprofit youth ministry called Real Teens. That's real with two E's. Um, and the purpose of Real Teens is to be a safe haven of love, support, and fun for teenagers while promoting spiritual growth and service to the community. So essentially, I want to start a faith-based teen center for the teens in this community, just to give them a safe place to be, to hang, to have family, to feel loved, to grow spiritually, to learn the importance and value of serving and giving back. Um, so yeah, so I'm no longer on staff with Young Life. I'm on staff with Urban Collaborative, and I'm doing Real Teams at the same time. But still connected with Young Life. My best friend is the director of Young Life in the inner city, Jeremy Robinson, and we still collaborate, and do a lot of things together. Um, so yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Awesome. Couple questions.
Hmm.
Real with two E's.
Yes.
What's I mean, when I heard that initially, I was like, oh, okay, cool. Uh, he must be into fishing. But then I was thinking about it a little bit more. I was like, well, maybe he's into like movies, you know, and how they used to have like the old like photo reels and that kind of thing.
Right, right.
How did you arrive at real with two E's?
So at a Young Life camp, the first Young Life camp I went to was in 2007, and that was at Lost Canyon, Arizona. And though I had been involved with Young Life as a volunteer for 7 years up to that point, I still had never been to camp because I had always worked full time. But at this point, I was able to have the time and ability to go to camp. So I took a group of kids to camp, and the experiences, like, it blew my mind. It really had a major impact on me, and just the love that you felt at the camp itself by the staff and the volunteers. They just really had a good way of making you feel very comfortable, making you feel welcome, making you feel like this place is for you. And that had a huge impact on me, and also just the atmosphere of just the things that you can do. It was a place that teenagers really, really wanted to be at. Um, so two things I feel like God put on my heart that week at camp was one, to go into full time youth ministry. I never had the burden of doing youth ministry for a living, but that week at camp, that burden all of a sudden sprung up in my heart. And also, the other thing was to bring this experience back to Southeast San Diego, and I kind of didn't really know what that looked like. Um, so then, just getting back home and praying and doing research and just trying to figure things out. Um, and with this new burden on my heart to do youth ministry full time, um, it kind of reminded me of Jesus calling Peter and saying, "You follow me, and I'll make you a fisher of men." Um, and I feel like Christ was telling me the same thing, but that He would make me a fisher of teenagers. And back then they used nets, and now we use fishing reels.
There we go.
so, so that's where the name and idea of Real Teen came from. We're fishing for teenagers, and Real is also an acronym for reaching, engaging, empowering, and loving, and that's what we seek to do in Real Teens, is to reach them, engage them, empower them, and love them into the love of Christ.
Man, now I want to come hang out with you guys.
Hey, come on, man.
Let's go. Man, what a blessing! What a blessing. Lastly, just before we kind of get started, could I, if you wouldn't mind,
Yeah.
where did you like? What region of San Diego did you grow up in? Maybe this will get into our segue. Where do you live now? What church do you attend? Those types of questions.
Okay, so I grew up in Southeast San Diego, and for those who may be unfamiliar with that, Southeast San Diego is known as like the inner city of San Diego, or what you may call the hood of San Diego. We're north of National City, and south of City Heights, east of downtown. Um, so that community is really diverse. It's definitely one of the bigger black communities. Now it's more diverse with um, my Hispanic brothers and sisters. A large majority of them here in this community. Then we also have Asian communities here within Southeast San Diego. So it's very very diverse, but it's definitely growing up for me was a hub for it was a black community. So this is where I grew up. This is where I played sports. This is where I had my experience, and this is where I started doing youth ministry right here in this community. Um, then after I got married, I moved out to East County, Oklahoma. Lived there for about 11 years. And then about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I moved out to Bonita, just so I can get closer to Southeast. It's crazy. It's always been this thing where I've always wanted to come back to Southeast. ever since that burden was placed on my heart. But my wife is like, "Nah, we're not going back to Southeast," just because some of the we have a family now, and just some of the issues associated with our community. Um, but it's always been on my heart. So, so finally we're able to come to this compromise, and we had this opportunity to move to Bonita, which is like not even 10 minutes from Southeast San Diego. And then recently, about maybe 2 months ago, we actually moved back into Southeast San Diego,
Oh
and we
wow.
plan on buying a home here in Southeast San Diego. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about that.
I love that. I think it's so special to be living in the community that you're serving.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I
absolutely.
think, I think that I mean that's on my heart, right?
Yeah,
That's I would love to live in the community that I'm serving, and I think that that's very it's so cool to see how God is just even opening the doors, right? And I think that
yeah.
like our wives shape us and help mold us,
Oh
and
yeah,
help us stay balanced.
yeah,
And if God called you there, like if He's opening up an opportunity for you to buy a home, for you to
yeah,
kind of get back in there, and I think that that's super important, and
yeah,
that's really cool, man. I'm excited.
yeah.
It gets me like, oh man, I love seeing God open up doors
Yeah.
in ministry for people.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's been, man. It's been a long time coming. It's been a prayer of mine for years, and it's just cool to see how God has just begun changing my wife's heart for one, but also as He's changing her heart, He's opening doors. So it's been a pretty cool experience for me.
That's cool. How close are you to Lord's Gym? I'm just kidding.
The old Lord's Gym, yeah. So I'm over here by South Crest Park, kind of by Lincoln High School, about maybe five
Okay.
minutes from Lincoln High School.
Is Lord's Gym still
So
around?
it's not Lord's Gym.
Oh man.
Closed down a while ago. I want to say maybe 2008 or nine ish, somewhere around there. I want to say. Um, but man, I used to love the Lord's Gym, man.
Yeah,
I used
dude.
to work there. I used to love hanging out with the kids. I mean, working out. It was just like a community place, a community center. Just seeing so many people from the community that you know, and um, it was just great. It was a great place.
I loved it. I loved
Yeah,
being there, working out for the football team and everything.
yeah.
And then one day the boxing instructor was in there, and he's like, "Hey, let's work." So like for a whole summer we were doing boxing, and it's like
Wow.
working on
Yeah.
footwork
Yep.
and all that type of stuff, and it's just good things all around.
Yeah, man.
So well, awesome. Well, I want to I I think that it's rad to see God working in your life and God doing things in your life. The uh, but well, not even a but. It's understood that today, in
Yeah.
America, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of
Yeah.
there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of hurt. Um, we're at one of those tipping points.
Mm-hmm.
We're at one of those tipping points, and there's a lot of um, there's a lot of things to discuss. It's
Yeah.
it's a complex situation
Yeah.
when we're talking about how America is in the blending of so many cultures, and even just if you look at a map, America's a very large country, right? The things that
Yeah.
we experience in San Diego might be a little bit different than what we experience over in, my experience over in Chicago or New York or Miami,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think um, I think that what's important for us and for us as the church is when I say church, I mean Big C Church, right? Like the
Yeah.
body
Yeah.
of
For sure.
Christ
Yeah.
needs to listen and needs to uh, when a part of us is hurting, you know, we need to
Yeah.
listen, and
Yeah.
I think that it's uh, you've seen all the different analogies. There's the firefighter analogy. There's that.
Yeah.
For me, it's the body of Christ is hurting, and we have the tools. We have the tools
Mm-hmm.
to get the medical attention that we need for the body, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
But like, there's some pretty severe injuries that are coming to the surface right now,
yeah, absolutely.
and I want to give you this time to kind of talk about that. So, uh, just
Okay.
where to get started?
Uh,
Maybe tell us a little bit of what it like. Explain to me. Tell me about uh, what it's like to be a black kid growing up in Southeast San Diego. You know, and like
yeah,
what it means to be a black person in San Diego.
yeah. So it's definitely complex, and it definitely comes with a lot of mixed emotions and mixed feelings. You know what I mean? We as black people, we really take pride in our culture. From our music to our dancing, to our humor, to athletics, we definitely take pride in our culture. Um, and but it's also frustrating growing up especially as a black man in the black community, because you tend to be portrayed a certain way, and most of the time that's in a negative light. Most of the time that's stereotyped as like a gang member, or a drug dealer, or some sort of thug, or so it's definitely been hard, growing up as a black person in the city. Um, I can remember even now, like just going in stores, and not seeing not seeing something that you came in there for, and having to walk out without an item, is it can cause anxiety, and it could be a crazy situation, because you know that eyes are on you, and you know what the perception is. You know that um, the thought is, did he steal something? You know what I mean? Is he getting away with something? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you know that in the back of people's minds, especially those who work at the stores or whatever. Like that tends to be like what they're thinking, or or you know being a teenager, and walking in the mall with your friends, just going to the mall on the weekend just to hang out, you and your group of friends, and next thing you know, security guards are following you and keeping an eye on you. And there's tons of other groups of other races, but they, I mean, it's like the eyes are on us, and it can be frustrating. And then the whole thing with racial profiling, you know what I mean, by the police. I can remember, not too long ago. I want to say maybe like 3 years ago. Um, I went to go pick up a kid for discipleship training that we were doing at my church. So I went and picked him up, and on my way back to the church, I'm driving, and the kid, young African American male, he was about maybe 16, 17 at the time. He was in my passenger seat. He had a hoodie on, and I'm driving. I think I have like a hat on, and I'm going east. No, I'm going west, down Imperial Avenue, and then there's a police officer in the squad car going uh, west, going east. I'm going west. He's going east, and as he's going by, I just kind of turn to look, and he looks at me, and then immediately he like busts a U-turn in the middle of traffic, and just pulls me over for literally for no reason. He pulls me over. He comes to the car, and I'm like, why did you pull me over? And he's like, because you have a tail light out. Um, and I said, well, did you see that my tail light was out when you were going the opposite direction, and you just busted a U-turn on me? And he kind of didn't have anything to say, and he took my information, and gave me like a fixer ticket or whatever. Um, but just like that in itself, like the fact that you can look at me, and the first thing that you see is something negative. The first thing you see is uh, he can be a gang member, or he can possibly be a drug dealer. I mean, not knowing that I'm this, youth leader, youth minister, or pastor, whatever you want to call it, in my community, that seeks to do good, and seeks to keep kids out of the system. You know what I mean? Um, and then so I've had many of experiences like that. I remember another time. This when I was really younger. I was probably like 19 or 20 years old at this time. I had just got a new car. Coming home from the skating rink. We used to go skating all the time back then. So I'm on my way home, and a police officer pulls me over. So when you get a new car, the dealership puts the registration sticker on your front windshield,
Yeah.
um, and, and and they have that until you get your actual tag. So I didn't have my tags, but I had that strip in my front windshield. So the cop gets behind me. I guess they saw I didn't have a tag on the back of my plate. So they pulled me over, asked for my license registration. I explained that the registration is right here on the windshield. But she was going on and on that, you're supposed to have tags and it should be in the back. Like, well, the dealership put it on the front. I mean, I kind of don't know what to tell you. So she took my information, took my ID, went back to her police car, did a check. Everything came back good and legit. She gave me my ID back. And at that point, I'm assuming she's letting me go. So I put my ID up, and then I pull off, didn't thinking nothing of it. I turn the corner. She turns the corner, speeding towards me with the lights on, turns the sirens on, pulls me back over. I pull over, and she comes to my front window with her gun drawn and pointed at my head and starts yelling at me. Do you think this is a game? What are you doing? Why did you leave? And I'm like, well, I thought you let me go. You gave me my license back. Um, so at that I could have easily been shot and killed. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like way back then, and there was no dash cam or body cameras. Or, anything like that. I didn't have any weapons. No need to. Um, the interaction that we had at first was it wasn't like a confrontation. I was just trying to explain to her like why my registration was up there, why I didn't have a tag. Um, so so just stuff like that that just like so many people in black people in our communities go through things like that where they are um, they're racially profiled and treated in a certain way because of the color of the skin or because of a stereotype and how they're betrayed and portrayed. And so it's frustrating. It can be really frustrating.
Man, I think it has to be so hard to be born a certain way, right? Like this is not only is not only were you born this way and you can't change it, right?
Hmm.
But you read the Bible and you read God's word and it's like, man, I'm a human.
Yeah,
I'm not a black person. I'm a human, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and God created me in His image,
yeah,
and then to have to live your life. And forgive me if this is the wrong language, but almost like you're constantly a suspect. You're like
yeah,
an innocent
yeah,
suspect, like
yeah,
nonstop. I think, like that's a burden that's hard. Like,
yeah.
I mean, this is in no way, shape, or form similar, but like, I even hate going to like, when you're on a road trip and you like have to go to the restroom, and
Uh-huh.
like, I hate going to like, the McDonald's or whatever to use the restroom and like not paying for something because I feel like that they're gonna look at me on the way out.
Yeah,
I can't
yeah,
imagine.
yeah,
I can't imagine what
yeah,
it's like every single time you go into a store, because like I'm sure that there's times when you walk out of a store and like you might have one item and the person doesn't see your one
right,
item or whatever,
right.
and it's like you could just feel those
Oh
eyes
yeah,
on the back of your head,
oh yeah,
and like
yeah,
that's hard, man.
yeah. It's frustrating. It's definitely frustrating, especially when you seek to do good. You know what I mean? And
Right.
you want to do good for your community, and you know that um, that's just not the type of person you are. But they don't see that. You know what I mean? Like recently, I saw that I forgot what city he is a mayor in, somewhere back east, but he was out there in plain clothes, and he was protesting with the
Hmm.
protesters, and he was pepper sprayed. Here it is, the mayor, a black guy, the mayor of a whole city, and he was pepper sprayed because of the color of his skin. Like they didn't
Yeah.
see that this was someone who actually ran their city. You know what I mean? So it's like it doesn't care like what you do or what you stand for. They see the color and they tend to react, the way they react. So it's frustrating, to be
Yeah,
honest.
I mean, I think it happens everywhere, and
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
the unfortunate thing is like there's no safe haven, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and yet you were born into this. You were born an American.
yeah.
You were born. One of the things that I've tried to do is to, refer to my black brothers and sisters as fellow Americans. They're black
Hmm.
Americans.
Yeah, yeah.
They're not like African, Americans. They're not another country Americans. They're
Hmm.
black Americans. They're Americans,
Yeah,
and I think that that's like got to be so difficult
yeah.
um, when just living your life. What was it like for you younger? Like when did you first realize that? Oh wait, I'm my life is different because of my skin color.
Um,
You see the memes going around right now where it's like children aren't born racist. You know, like
yeah. Well, I always knew it because, like I said, I went to a small private school in my community called
mhm,
St. Stephen. St. Stephen's actually a church, but back then they had a school.
okay,
And this was a predominantly black school. So and it was a private school. So we had, we did our Bible lessons, but we were very heavy on black history. So we learned a lot about slavery. We learned a lot about segregation and I mean Jim Crow and things like that, and learned a lot about you know Martin Luther King and Marcus Garvey and Langston Hughes and people like that. So we knew um, at that age what was going on in our country. Um, I don't know. I can't tell you when. Well, definitely there were times being in the mall. Like I said, like me and my friends on my block, we would go to the mall all the time as teenagers and just hang out in the mall, and we would get followed by mall security, and it would be frustrating with all these people here and all these groups of people gather. You just want to focus on us as if we're doing something wrong. We're just hanging out like everybody else. So you kind of saw what was going on at a young age. You just kind of knew it. You kind of felt it. Um, just being in the black community, you would see a lot of things with the police and um, I don't know. I definitely knew it at a young age what time it was in our country. So
that has to be hard. Like, that has to. I mean, systematically, like in your life, right, with regularity in your life, you're put on the defensive.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
you're just
yeah,
that's just the reality of where you're at.
yeah.
Um, and I mean, I think that kind of that points to that that points to a whole group of people. I could be wrong with these numbers, but from what I see is something around 15% of Americans are black. Um,
Yeah, I
and
think like 13. I want to say it's 13.
I thought it was 13, but I was trying to be a
Yeah.
little bit more generous, but still 13, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
That means one in every 10 is a black man.
Hmm.
Or more than one in every 10 is a black man. 13 out of
Yeah.
every 100. And when you have a whole community, I mean, think about 10% of anything.
Hmm.
That's a whole letter grade in school.
Yeah.
ten
Yeah.
percent of your body is like at
Yeah.
least your arm. Like 10% of anything is significant, right? If you
Right.
and and when you have 10% of a people group, 10% of 300 million people who've grown up on the defensive, grown up feeling like a suspect, um, feeling feeling like the chips are stacked against them, and then the people who are supposed to protect all American people um, are not helping you or the situation. I mean,
Right.
uh, like, or looking at you as a suspect. I think that's got to at least help us explain and understand a little bit of what's going on today, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, and that's what we're seeing right now in our country. We're seeing a group of people who has historically, systematically been treated with less equality than our white brothers and sisters. You know what I mean? Like we're not treated equally, and we're not treated fairly. You know, there are laws um, that are that work out for our detriment instead of our benefit. You know what I mean? Um, and we're seeing it and we're feeling it. You know what I mean? Like just even with the fact that there are like inner city communities and things like that. You go back to the 1940s and 50s with the redlining and um, if you were they sectioned out certain communities that were more desirable and some that were less desirable, and they would give loans to those more desirable communities and people, and deny the home loans to those less desirable people in the communities. Well, that the less desirable people in communities happen to be black people and people in black neighborhoods, and that's how you get like the emergence of the like suburbans and suburbs and the urban communities. Um, so and even with that, I remember uh, maybe 2 years ago, my wife and I were looking for like a house to rent with my brother-in-law. So the four of us, me, my wife, my brother-in-law, and his wife, we going to check out this house. And as soon as we walked in to meet the owner of the house, you could just tell, like you could just tell the look and the demeanor of the person that we weren't going to get it, and we knew why. You know what I mean? Like we knew exactly why. We knew exactly what was going on. Um, you know, this person tried the hardest to make us feel like she didn't feel the way she felt. If that makes sense. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So, and once we even did the application and everything like that, like we knew we weren't going to get it, and it wasn't based on um, any credit or rental history or nothing like that. It was based on our skin color. You know what I mean? They didn't want black people living in their house. That's really what it came down to. Um, so it's beginning to get more blatant. Well, not I won't even say more blatant. Blatant. It's getting caught more.
Okay.
What we see as a systematic issue in our country is getting caught more. It's been happening. You know what I mean? It's been happening since the inception of our country. Um, but now it's being recorded more. It's being more in the public eye, and people are beginning to wake up to the fact that there is a systemic issue in our country. So it's frustrating, but what's going on right now? It gives me hope because people are now speaking out in a way that I've never seen before. White people are coming out and speaking out against the issue. White people are saying, we've been wrong for so long, and we've got to get this right. White people are recognizing that there are some systemic issues in our country that negatively impact and affect African Americans, um, and they see it, and so we're not just crying wolf. We're crying and screaming the reality that we've experienced for far too long, and people are starting to see it, and so that's kind of what we're seeing now with all the protests taking place, not all over the country, but all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, people are seeing it because it's getting more and more blatant. So so yeah, I'm hopeful of what could come out of this. You know what I mean? I've been getting a lot of love and support from my white brothers and sisters, just reaching out to me saying, hey, I just want to tell you that I'm here for you. I empathize with you. Um, I know what you're going through must be rough, and I'm just here to listen and here to learn, and that's the start of healing. That's the start of um, racial reconciliation. I mean, we have a long way to go, and we still have a system that we have to fight. But at least on the ground in our communities and in our personal interactions, we have people who are willing to listen and hear and say, you know what, I never knew, and I'm glad to stand with you. I'm really liking that.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. briefly, I want to just say this. If you guys have questions for James in the chat, sorry, my
Yeah.
my workstation is over here, but my
Yeah.
camera's here. If you guys have questions for James, please put them in the chat, and I'll try to work them in. When it seems appropriate, and even at the end, we'll just have a random Q&A if there are people who have questions that don't seem to fit well. But back to what you were saying, I think, and if I'm being totally honest, I think part of what's difficult is when we are educated on these things. I think without understanding without having like the emotional response, so to speak, without listening to stories of our black fellow Black Americans, and other people of color, but right now it's specifically black that we're talking about, right? I think without having those stories or having that context, it can be really hard for a white person, someone who maybe grew up in a suburb, right? Someone who grew up where they didn't have the cops going down their street every day, like those kinds of things. It can be really hard when we're studying or when we're learning about these things to really have an impact on us, right?
Yeah.
I think about like the first time I went through American history, for example. I well, the first time I went through American history, I think kind of the way it was taught, which is maybe part of the problem, but maybe not part of the problem. I don't know. That's a different conversation for later. But because I didn't have a lot of perspective at that age, when we're going through American history, you touch on the major events, right? So like you jump straight from, you jump straight from the Pilgrims Landing and like all that type of stuff, and the establishment of New England and the Revolutionary War, and then you like jump straight to the Civil War, right? And then from there you jump straight to World War One, right? And I think a lot of what's been shocking to me, even as I've gone back and read, and I've been looking into all these different things that happen, is that like a lot of what we see today, for the freed black man, but the racism and the systemic racism that we see today was established post Civil War, and like those practices were established post Civil War and pre World War One. And in a lot of ways, it's like, okay, Henry Ford invented the car. It's like something like that. But like, I mean, there were decades of things that put systems in place that, frankly, were were remnants of the South wanting to keep slaves, and the South looking at black people as different and as property, and heartbreakingly so. Like, they wanted to. So they're like, okay, we lost this battle, but we're gonna still win this war by putting down black people, right? And then for decades, and I mean, there's so much stuff that happened that I'd read about, I'd learned, but it didn't hit my heart. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think part of that is, and what I'm thankful for, is that people are listening to stories, and people are now able to like hear the context of what's happening, and go, wait a second, let me go back and see where this all started. And now we're seeing people getting frustrated, for lack of a better term, at redlining, right? We're getting frustrated at these things that were put into place kind of in that era, in about that 100 years, right? or 1865 to say the 1960s,
Mm-hmm.
that were put in place and that were formative to what we know in America today, but are oppressive and racist driven for black people. So like,
Yeah, and that's why you said something that's key is like you learn, this certain type of history, and it's hard for you because of how you're raised, to like understand it. And then when you go back and you start learning about things, um, it like it's like an eye opener. But then you have to emotionally connect with the stories of people and
right,
individuals, to really get the magnitude of it. And that's why I think it's so important for our white brothers and sisters to have conversations like this where they listen to the stories, because the pain and the frustration that is going on is not isolated. This is not just a George Floyd um,
yeah,
thing. You know what I mean? George Floyd was the tipping point. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, I've had enough. You know what I mean? But what you're hearing is not just the systematic oppression, the police brutality that we're seeing, and officers continually getting off and not being convicted
yeah,
um, when killing innocent black people, um, unarmed black people, and there's no convictions happening. So you have that, but on top of that, you do have stories like mine and stories like others who are frustrated, and what they see with George Floyd is just a picture of what they've been through, and you know what I mean, their personal
yeah,
experience, and now they're given this opportunity to voice it. It's like I've been through this personally, and I keep seeing this also in my communities, and so now we're just tired of it. So we're not just out there shouting out Black Lives Matter just based off what we see in the news. We're saying that based off what we experience ourselves. So I do think it's important that our white, brothers and sisters, look beyond the protest and hit up your black friends and say, like, help me understand, what are your stories? What are your personal stories? What are some things that you've
right,
been through? Because we all resonate with what we see. You know what I mean? Like when that happens to George Floyd and others, like that can happen to me, and that can happen to my son, that can happen to my brother, and you know what I mean. And a lot of people know. I know someone personally who is a victim of um, being shot and killed by the police.
wow,
You know what I mean? Right here from San Diego, it happened. I want to say in like L.A. County or something a couple of years ago. Um, but we're just not out here for our health, just because it sounds good to
right,
yell out and protest. We're here because there is a huge problem in our country, and it hasn't been addressed, and we need to address it. Um, and what we see is just a limb of what we've experienced personally, and what can happen to us if we don't stand up and make a change. So, um, and so when I hit the streets and I, yell Black Lives Matter, that's exactly what I mean. My life matter. You know, what I mean, I'm not so much representing an organization, the Black Lives Matter organization. I'm saying that because this is how I feel, and this is what I see. I see the lack of Black lives mattering to people. You know what I mean?
right,
And our lives do matter. Our lives do have value, and that hasn't been demonstrated over for more than 400 years. And for a lot of us personally in our own lives, and we want to make a change. We want to make a difference. We're not asking to be better than anyone else. We're not asking for extra rights. We're asking for basic human rights. We're asking for equality, to be treated the same, to be seen as the same, for the police training to be for them to be trained as if we're the same as everyone else, and not to be looked at as different and approached as different, approached as if our skin color is a weapon. You know what I mean? Like we
yeah.
just want to be treated as human beings.
I imagine that's got to be hard because you see a lot of different explanations of things uh, as all this rhetoric is coming out, but ultimately, uh, that change has to happen in the hearts of people, right?
Yeah.
Because I imagine like you as a black family, right? If
Mhm.
you, uh, let's say the government said, "Hey, we'll pay for half of your house in some white community," right?
Mhm.
Um, I'd imagine you would have to like based on what you just said, you'd have to pause and be like, "Wait, what's the catch? Like,
Right.
what am I gonna have to live with as the
Yeah.
token black family in this white neighborhood, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like, and you even have to, and this is maybe bringing in a little extra conversation that we've had, you know, before
Yeah.
this, but but uh, you would have to think about the emotional toll that would be on you and your family,
Yeah. Absolutely.
right? And you'd have to think about like, wow, maybe if I think of like Ahmaud Arbery, right? If there
Mhm.
was some if there was some crime in that neighborhood, we would instantly be the suspects, you
Yeah.
know, and like,
Absolutely.
or you know, if like, or you, there might be people who would sit there and say, "Oh man, well now our home values are going down," you know, or like those, and
Mhm.
it's like, but what about the human, you know, like
Yeah. Yeah.
what about the Wiley family, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that would definitely be hard, especially like even just sending my kids to like an all white school. You,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like what they would have to potentially deal um, with that. You know what I mean? Like how would they be portrayed? How would they be be looked at? How would they be treated? You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Um, and that's a fear of mine. You know what I mean? Like how are we going to be looked at when we go into the grocery store, or will we, um, or even when we walk into the church? How sadly so, how will we be looked at? You know what I mean? And these are all real feelings, um and so I couldn't imagine, and there will definitely be a sense of being uncomfortable and just wondering like what people think about me, and not so much that I care about what people think, but it does kind of play a toll in that, um in this environment where the history of these type of settings, and you know what I mean.
Right.
um but on the other foot, there are some great white people out there. It's not so much a individual white person issue. I think it's more systemic, but I think some of those prejudices do and biases do come out, maybe unknowingly. You know what I mean? And and we feel that. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like the look or the stare or the um you know what I mean? I don't know. It's just a lot, or maybe even it's even uncomfortable when maybe that you go into a all white church and they go out their way extra to try to make you feel comfortable. That can
That's
sometimes even be
awkward, man.
uncomfortable.
I can only imagine. I I don't want to say that I've felt that, right? Because this is in your home nation, but like I still remember when I spent a summer in Vietnam, and like it was one of the weirdest things because I was very different, right?
Hmm.
I mean they don't see a 6'3", 300 pound white person
Right. Yeah.
ever, and the average height is something like 5'6", right? I mean,
Right.
it's like significant. The first time we walked into church, I was given all this extra special attention, and it was like I was like, stop, and like,
Right.
but here's you like in your own home, right? Your home nation, right? I can
Right.
expect it there because
Right.
I'm the foreigner, but you're not the foreigner here, you know.
Right.
Um,
Right.
we were talking about kids a little bit, and we have a question here in the chat that I want to I think would be good to put in here now. The chat says, I've heard other Black American fathers
Hmm.
mention have and in quotes air quotes having the talk with their children at
Hmm.
some age, explaining the
Yeah.
ramifications of being born with dark skin in our current culture. Is that something you can speak to and explain to those who don't know about it? Can you elaborate
Yeah,
on what it means to have the talk with your kids?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I have two kids, two boys. One is 14, one is 8, and I've had to have the talk with them. Um, you need to understand that when you walk out this door, you may not be treated uh, as other people. Um, if you have an encounter with the police, make sure you're polite. Make sure you're not talking back. Make sure you're not giving them any reason um, to say or do anything. Um, you know what I mean? Like, make it home safely. You know what I mean? And it's like, and that's kind of the talk is your safety. Like, don't walk around here sagging your pants. Um, when you walk into stores, if you have on the hood, take your hood off. Um, you know what I mean? Make sure you talk in a way that um, doesn't uh, bring attention to you. Um, so there's that. So there, it's like preparing them for what's in society and what can potentially happen, and helping them to break stereotypes and helping them to be safe, to make it home safe. Um, and so that's really what the talk is about. Is um, society will present you in a certain way. Police will see you in a certain way based off the color of your skin. So you have to make sure that you're doing everything in your power um, to be careful. He he's in high school now, and he has friends, and they have like a store that's like right down the street,
Hmm.
not even 5 minutes from the school. And it was hard for me to give him the space to walk down to the store and back because I'm worried about something potentially happening to him. You know what I mean? Um, and so I finally was able to give him that freedom. But like, hey, call me as soon as you get there. Call me as soon as you get back to the school, and when you're on your way back to the school. You know what I mean? So um, it's really just helping them understand that, and even teaching them our history, and you know what I mean, just things that have happened in our history. Like, this is our history. This is even how we as Black people got to this country, and this is what has happened. Like in the 70s, this is why we talk about Martin Luther King, and why he's a hero, and this is what he stood for and fought for. Um, so just having to teach him those lessons, and teach him the reality of the world and the communities, the society that we live in, and making sure I give him the tools to always be safe and to be aware of his surroundings. So that's what the talk is about.
Is that hard to accept for, a young kid? Like, at what age do you have that with your son, or at what age did you have that conversation with you? And like, and is that a hard conversation to like accept? Do young kids kind of fight against that, or like,
Uh,
you know?
so I think the first time I had that conversation was after the Trayvon Martin incident,
Okay.
when he was murdered by George Zimmerman. Me and my wife had to sit him down, and my younger son was way younger at the time, but my older son, he was around maybe 8 or 9 or maybe 10 at the time. Um, so we just had to sit down and tell him like, hey, this is what's going on in our country right now, and it was difficult. Um, he listened. He didn't have really any questions about it. Um, he just took in what we were telling him, and through what we saw through like TV and things like that in the news, and how the marching and the protests were going on. He saw the reaction of it in our country, um, through the media and things like that. But he wasn't very inquisitive. I think he just took our word for it,
Hmm.
and just kind of adjusted. So yeah.
That has to be hard as a father too, like to have that conversation with your kids.
Yeah, and it's even more as he's getting older. It's even more nerve wracking, um, especially because my kids have dreadlocks.
Okay.
Both of their hair are dreaded up, and and that brings you know stereotype of its own. You know what I mean? Within the black community, is that if you have dreads, it's like you're like one of the worst of the worst. You know, you definitely have to be
Mm,
a drug dealer or a gang member. You know what I mean? Like, just the way our media has portrayed people with dreads. You know what I mean? And a lot of negative images and things like that. Um, so, and worrying about that, you know what I mean? And he's getting closer to the age where he'll be driving soon, and so you know it's nerve wracking. It's frustrating. It causes a little bit of anxiety. Um, you know, just want to make sure that they're always on their p's and q's, and that they're just being safe. But my eyes just have to be open a whole lot more as he gets older, and it's kind of an unfortunate thing.
man. I mean, as a father, my son's too, but
Hmm.
and I, like, I think I think what I've learned is with everything that's going on is let's call a spade a spade. Let's not beat around the bush and say, I don't see color,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
those types of things. I was born into privilege as a white person. Uh,
Hmm.
my son is born into privilege as a white person, and I think that uh, I'm trying to imagine having that conversation with my son, and my heart breaks. My heart breaks for you. My heart breaks for your kids because, like, to have the conversation, people are going to treat you different because you look just because of the way you were born
Hmm.
is hard. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I I want to give you all the space possible to share stories and to talk to us about things. I kind of had in my mind three different areas that we talk about. You know uh, the kind of the past, the present, and the future. Just kind of really simple buckets. Um, and I want to encourage, and I'm going to say it again. I'm going to keep saying it. We're getting some really good questions in the chat. I want to get to all
Yeah.
of these. I want to get to all these questions. I'm just going to have to use my discernment of when we talk about them. Um,
Okay.
so, is there anything else like in the past? I guess whether it's American history, your personal history, things you've dealt with, or whatever it may be. Is there anything in the past that you want to like touch on? Like, we can obviously talk about them later, but like anything that you feel like is like really important to talk about and to touch on, um, in this conversation right now.
Yeah, I think one of the because in history there's different segments of things that's going on. So for black people is so initially it was slavery, and then after that there was the whole Jim Crow era where there were it was legal segregation, and then there was um, the lack of voting rights and unequal opportunities to education and employment and government services and things like that, and then um, that kind of phased out, and then so now we're at that point where it hasn't really phased out, it's just changed. And
Okay.
what has changed is now it's the thing of this mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex,
Okay.
where people of African American black people um, are grossly targeted unproportionately, and given crime sentences. You can have a black person and a white person both convicted of the same crime, um, and a lot of times black people get larger and harsher sentences than white people who committed the same crime. And then just the way we're policed in our community, um, and then they do their time and they come out of prison, and now they have this felony on their record, and their felony now allows them to legally uh, be treated just as if they were in the Jim Crow era, with the legal um, uh, what can I say, like the the so now their chances for employment are hindered. Now their chances for higher education are hindered. Um, housing and even voting, now those things are legally hindered.
Mm-hmm.
So what we kind of see is what happened in the Jim Crow era being kind of like switched and formatted into a way that it's still going on, but it just comes through a different channel. Um, and then the school to prison pipeline, where you have prisons being built based on the reading levels of kids in third grade. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then the truancies, they kick kids out of school. And I remember reading a story about a kid who was, I forgot what happened in school, but he was sent home. Um, Mom is at work, so he has to walk home in the middle of the day while school is going. On his way home, he gets pulled over by the police officers, and they arrest him for truancy, and he ends up having to like go to like juvenile hall or something like that. And but it was just like even truancies disproportionately affect
Right.
black people than white people, and then and once you kind of get into the cycle of that system, it's really hard to get out, especially when you have like uh, a record as a teenager. So I think that's one of the things that, and I'm learning a lot more about that, and how that's played out. But I've seen it. I have kids who I've mentored over the years um, who have went to juvenile hall and went to prison, and and um, and it's just hard to get out of that cycle, and like it's hard for the rehabilitation to happen because of even um, the laws of probation. You know what I mean? Just makes it hard to even live as a regular citizen, even with the laws of probation. So that's a whole nother subject and category, but that's just something that I'm learning more and more about. Um, just how that is playing into Black lives in inner city communities, and that goes into how we're being policed and how we're being pulled over.
Right.
Um, what I mean, it all ties in together, and that's one of the systematic things that we're up against and that we're fighting against. So it's just so much, man. It's so much. So
Well, and I
but
think
that's one thing I'm educating myself on more and more, and I see it happening time and time again. And there's just so many things systematically that has to change.
it's like what you're saying. I want to say if it's important to you, and it doesn't, it feels out of order to you or whatever. But if it's important to you, like it's important to me. So,
Yeah.
like, like as you're talking about these things and truancy and all this stuff, like I even remember like growing up. Uh, so I grew up homeschooled, right? And
Hmm.
because of that, when you're 12 years old, like our mom would let us go ride our bikes in the neighborhood or, that kind of thing. But
Hmm.
it might be during normal school hours, so to speak. And my
Right.
mom having that conversation with me about like, hey, if someone stops you, you need to say explain to them what's going on. What was never on the table was juvenile hall, right? Like,
Oh wow.
you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like it was never like there was this understood, if you're riding your bikes at 1 in the afternoon, right, when you're supposed to quote unquote be in school,
Right. Yeah.
um, and you're 12 years old or whatever, and someone stops you, whether it be a cop or a community member or whatever, um, and someone stops you, like juvenile hall was never part of that
Yeah.
equation,
Yeah.
and I think that that's just part of what you're talking about, where it's like, man,
Yeah.
like we have to take things to such an extreme, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you shouldn't be sent home from school and have to worry about going to juvenile hall, right? Like
Right.
that's
Right.
just that. I mean, I don't know. You're saying this, and I'm hearing this for the first time, and like having to process it for the first time, and that's
Yeah.
incredible. One thing you did mention, and when I say incredible, not like
Yeah. No,
not in a
I know
good
what you're
way.
saying.
Like
No,
it's like,
I
oh
know
my
what you're saying.
goodness, like
I got
it's like, wow, that's heavy.
Right.
I do want to ask one thing for you for clarity.
Hmm.
Jim Crow laws. We hear
Right.
them. That we hear people talking about them a lot today,
Hmm.
and a lot now. Um, and admittedly, like I've read a lot more on it now than I had before,
Hmm.
and you know that kind of stuff. But like, I don't want to, uh, I don't want to be the one to have to explain it, so to speak. Can you
Yeah. Yeah.
tell me like what does if someone says Jim Crow, what comes to your mind?
So when I hear Jim Crow, I hear of um, legally um, legally taking away the equality of black people.
In
Our
relation to white
equality.
people, right?
Say it again.
In relation to white people, right?
In
Or
relation to white people.
okay,
So
okay,
the our equality for education was not there. We were legally discriminated against. That's
right,
really what it is. In education, discriminated against. You know, the whole segregation. You know, we couldn't go to the good schools. We had to, you know, have our own schools, and they weren't as good as, you know, the white schools. The
right,
the um, the quality of education, um, job opportunities. Um, we legally were discriminated against.
right,
It was legal for black people to not get the same opportunities, whether it's education, whether it was housing, um, employment, all that. We just legally um, didn't have the rights to those same opportunities. So
okay,
voting, we you
yeah,
know we couldn't vote, and that's what, you know, Dr. King and the civil rights movement was partly about, giving black people a right to vote. Um, and so we were legally just discriminated against.
yeah. I think it's. I would encourage anyone who's hearing this for the first time, or who might hear a who might hear this and go like, yeah, but that's not like it is today, you know, or whatever. Like someone who might like struggle with that. I would encourage
Mhm.
everyone to go and look these things up because this is a part of our
Yeah,
American history, and
yeah,
then internalize it. Like take that information and turn it towards yourself. Right? Imagine if your vote was only worth 2/3, right?
mm-hmm.
Like I'm sorry, not 2/3. Yeah,
Three, yeah,
three
2/3, yeah,
fifths. Sorry, I said that wrong. Imagine if your vote was 3/5, right? That for every five white people, I'm saying for every three white people voting, you'd have to have five black people voting. Like,
mm,
you know, like that, like, and that's just one, right? And it's hard, and it's hard
yeah,
to like internalize and say, man, this is a part of our American history, and we can say, like that, you know, that's not in effect today. Your vote is 1 to 1 now, right?
right,
Uh, but that's part of the foundation that shaped our country. So when people say systemic racism, right? I think part of what's been hard for me as a white person is like, but that's not how it is today, right? That's not me today. That's not like I don't feel like you're 3/5 of who I am, right? Like I don't feel that way, especially for Christians, right?
right,
But the reality is that's the foundation that we started with. It'd be like it would be as if we were running a race, you know, and we all started at the same time. I just had
right,
to run I just
right,
had to run 30 yards and you had to run 50 yards, right? Like you know,
yeah,
it's while it's hard to accept, especially if we only look at say the last 30 or 40 years, right?
right,
Um, and it's like, man, like black people can do whatever they want. Well, sort of, but like there's
right,
all the trauma that has come from and the foundational things that has led to where we're at today. And if I may, and I hate, I almost if I want to share this as a to maybe help understand things a little more.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was talking to one of my
yeah.
black friends. He doesn't live in San Diego,
Okay.
but he was trying to explain to me. He's like, when you go to the pound and you adopt an animal that's been beaten, and you
Mm-hmm.
want nothing more to love on that animal and for it to be a part of your family, right?
Right.
But then like that animal like snaps back at you, and
Right.
that animal might be a little more violent or a little more
Yeah.
defensive or a little bit, whatever that is. Like right now, like for
100%.
us as the American church today, we have to understand that there's trauma that is affecting a whole people group. So as
Yeah.
we see that lashback right now, similar to how
Mm-hmm.
you adopt an animal from the pound and you give it all the food and all the love and all the pets you need, but then you find out that like if you scratch a certain spot on their head, they're gonna nip your hand or something. Like
Right. Yeah.
we're in that moment right now, you
Yeah.
know, and it's nothing that I did, right? I
Right.
wasn't part of Jim Crow, right, in that era of
Right.
American history, but I still have to deal with the effects of it today, right?
Right.
I didn't beat that animal that I adopted, right? And the
Right.
analogy isn't perfect, but like I
Yeah,
didn't
it makes sense.
I didn't cause it, but we still have to deal with it today. So,
And think about that analogy, and for the dog to snap, and for you to say, "What are you snapping for?" You don't have the right to snap. You don't have the right to to be defensive, against me. You know what I mean? And I don't care what happened to you in the past. I didn't do it, so don't snap at me. You know what I mean?
oof,
But all the dog sees is what's in front of him, and he has these experiences, and it's causing him to snap. So, and I feel like that's kind of what else we're seeing right now in regard to the whole George Floyd situation is a lot of white people telling us we don't have the right to be mad. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like we don't have the right to be angry and frustrated.
right.
We
James, you
don't
weren't
have the
born
right.
during the Jim Crow era, so why are you mad, right? And it's like
Right.
ah,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that kind of sets up some of these other questions that we have, and again, want to encourage more questions to come through. Uh, I think moving forward, right? So we have the situation. There's the snap, right? Like
Hmm.
again, this isn't. This is not just George Floyd, right?
Yeah.
I made a
Yeah.
post about a week ago, where it was haunting to me to hear him say, "I can't breathe,"
Mm.
right? Because we've heard that before,
Hmm.
right? Like I still remember. I think it was 2016 where Kobe and LeBron and they're in their warm ups and they're wearing black shirt, white letters. I
Yeah.
can't breathe, and I'm like, man, we've seen this before. Man, I'm like getting the
Right.
chills, but not the good chills
Yeah.
right now. Like,
Yeah.
um, and it was haunting. Like, if it's the best word I have for it, it was chilling. Um, I think there's a lot of people today looking forward that are like, I'm with you. I
Hmm.
understand you, or like, no, I don't understand you, but I hear you, right? Like I don't know what it's like to have a whole system against me. That's the
Hmm.
difference. Like we have to understand, like systemic racism and systematic racism both are coexisting right now, right?
Hmm.
Kind of like what you said, and I love that point where you're like, when I stand up and say Black Lives Matter, the organization, whatever, like leave that aside. What I'm saying is my Black Life
Yeah.
matters. Like,
Right.
um,
Right.
I moving forward. I think there's a lot of things that we have to address, and this is what I want to ask you about. Is we have a question in the chat that says, my pastor had a conversation with a local black police officer whose biggest issue with current protests is feeling like his fellow officers aren't wait are feeling like his fellow officers aren't the place to start when addressing racism. He acknowledges larger systemic issues, but feel the police aren't the most important group to focus on. Can you speak to where and how we start driving change?
He said police are the focus. Read
So,
that last part again.
let's see. A pastor had a conversation with a local black police officer whose biggest issue with current protests is feeling like his fellow officers aren't the place to start when addressing racism. He acknowledges larger systemic issues, but feels the police, aren't the most important group to focus on.
Oh wow, okay, okay,
So
gotcha.
like, I think the main question here is,
I
like,
hear it.
can you speak to where and how we start having change? Like, um, there's so many areas that this question covers, right?
Yeah, it does.
And I think that when we're talking about change, I think police accountability is a big part of it, right?
Hmm.
That we have, um, that we have police accountability is a big part of it. Laws are a big part of it,
Yeah,
right? Healing. We have another question about PTSD. I'm going to ask you that when we're done with
yeah.
this question. Um, like as we're going through this, um, can you speak to like how we can start having change? So let me start with this. How if you were James Wiley, and you are James Wiley, uh,
Right.
Mike Anderson, white pastor in America,
Hmm.
right? White pastor in La Mesa, California, um, San Diego, California, the county, right? Um,
Hmm.
how can we start seeing driving change, right? Where do we
Right.
start? How do we do it? What's like how do we be actively part of the solution? I guess would be another way.
Yeah. So where I would start is with this type of conversation. Um, these conversations have not been happening in our country between white and black people. Uh, they just I can't tell you the last time until this situation popped off. I can't tell you the last time um, I had a conversation with a white person um, about racial issues,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I'm not. I don't think that's anyone's fault.
Okay.
You know, what I mean, that's not white people's fault. That's not black people's fault. Um, but it's just something that just hasn't happened. Um, so now that everything is out and we have this thing going on in our country, I think the first level of change starts with having conversations. Starts with me and Mike having dialogue. It starts with me helping him understand how it feels as a black man in America. Um, and I think it starts there. And for white people, you just have to listen. You know, what I mean, you have to hear. You have to um, do your best to put yourself in that person's shoes and have empathy, and to not judge. It's okay to ask questions, but to not come off as if we're just playing games or like none of this
Right.
happened. So I think the best thing you can do is to begin having conversations where you try to understand. And as you begin to understand, I think it'll um, open up your mind to learning more, about Black history, which is something that is not taught in our schools. Black history is not taught in our schools. Black history is so complex within itself, and it's a part of American history, but it's not being taught to the general
Sure.
public. So just beginning to educate yourself. There's books we have um, on websites and just the internet. What I mean, there's so many ways you can learn um, about history. So I think conversations is the first level.
Okay.
I think another thing that has to be focused on is policing. And I want to say this. I want to make it very clear that all police officers are not bad. And I don't think anyone in the black community would say that. All police officers are not bad. I know police officers personally. I know some who are very loving and caring and are all about community and all about bridging the gap between the black community and law enforcement because there is a trust issue um,
Yeah.
within that. And And for me, part of that is, and actually, I just had a conversation with some of my youth on Wednesday, and just gave them space to talk about how they feel in light of everything going on. And but when we have these conversations, I also try to come up with solutions. And one of the solutions we came up with was to um, have um, this youth council where we are a group of youth um, who meet with law enforcement like at least once a quarter, and we are able to hold them accountable. We are able to ask them really hard questions. We're able to
Hmm.
ask them, have they been written up in the last 3 months due to racial profiling, or due to are you abusing your power and unjustly pulling people over? So it definitely be a tough conversation, but also um, a time to build relationship with law enforcement, and so that they will know us beyond the color of our skin, and that we will know them beyond their uniform, um, and that when we walk outside, we know that there are officers out here who actually know us by name, and we know them by name. So when we see them in the community, we can actually wave at someone who we've built some trust with. Um, so I feel like just like on a lower just community level, doing our best to bridge the gap and to build relationship with law enforcement. And I'll be honest, that's hard for me. That's my heart, but it's hard because I see what's going on, and sometimes when I see what's going on, it makes me angry. It makes me not want to do that. But I know that peace is the goal. And even if we
Right.
can't change a law, if we could change the hearts of those in our own community, then we win in that respect. Um, but also changing policies and practices. Um, there was a study that came out a couple of years ago right here in our community that black people were being racially targeted and profiled in our community, at a large rate. And so having like stricter laws and accountability when it comes to profiling and abusing power and authority, and and how they deal with the community in terms of restraint and things like that. When is a good time to pull your weapon? And I mean, there's just a lot of policies that need to be reformed and dealt with and changed. So for me, those are some of the places I would start.
So I'm a white person I,
Okay.
who wants to talk to you about this and wants to talk to you about these things. What I'm hearing is, don't necessarily come at someone and, hey, so what are your thoughts on, this law that passed in this year, or like,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
don't tell. What are your thoughts on the Civil War and the things that happened afterwards? Like, what I'm hearing is I mean, and this might seem overly simple, but I think it really is I be friends with
Yeah,
people of color, be friends with black people, and
yeah.
then as you build a relationship with them,
Exactly.
right? Then like,
Exactly.
and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I think this might just be general counseling that I would give anybody, right, about any sort of subject that's touchy, right?
Hmm.
Is ask if we can open the can of worms,
Yeah, yeah,
and ask for the permission for the space to be able to do that,
yeah,
and then listen, right?
yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
would you say it's as
And I
simple
think
as
that's
that?
the Yeah, I think that's the most important part is listening and building that relationship. So yeah, you don't just want to walk up to a black person and say, "Hey, what about these Jim Crow laws?" And what I mean, no, you want to build a relationship um, with people and allow it to come organically, and just allow just go from there. You know what I mean? And when the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity presents itself to talk about these hard racial issues, because you've built this relationship and you've built trust, it'll be easier for you guys to hear each other and to empathize with each other, to and to build that level where it's safe. That space where it's safe to actually talk about these issues. Um, but having these conversations is definitely key. Uh, but you do have to be smart about how you go about it. You know what I
Right.
mean? Don't just go blurt out. Hey, let's sit down and talk about this. I don't
Yeah.
even know you. You know what I mean? And I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know your intentions. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the relationship, I think that's critical. I think that's the most important part, and that's where it starts.
That's 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 wisdom right there. I think
Yeah.
um, if I can, express this, uh, I think it's hard for some people to breach the subject, right?
Hmm.
Even I, knowing how uh, traumatic the last few weeks has been, right, for you.
Hmm.
Um, Even I, when I texted you this last week and wanted to talk to you a little bit and just kind of hear your story and then, platform you here. Um,
Hmm.
I even felt like it wasn't nervousness, but it was definitely like I know I'm touching something that is very sensitive, and I want to
Yeah.
be careful. Kind of like how what would be an appropriate analogy? Holding a brand newborn. You know, where you're kind of like, man, this is a delicate thing, and I want to be careful.
Yeah.
Um, how can like what if someone wanted to talk to you about it, right? Let's say we have a youth who's watching this and is like, man, I want to ask James some questions, right? But like, I watched his interview. I feel like I know him now, but he doesn't know me.
Right. Yeah.
But I want to hear more. Um,
Yeah.
how might you say what would be a respectful way to open the can of worms, so to speak, with your black friends as a person of a different color?
Yeah. And I think so. For me, I'm more than happy to have that conversation, especially
Mm-hmm.
after this conversation. Um, so I think just saying like, hey, I just want to know more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have questions, and I just want to get an understanding. And I think if you come into it with wanting to get an understanding and want to just understand how the person feels, as opposed to saying, I want to have a conversation with you because I disagree with you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that's a different story. But if you're just saying, and you may have disagreements in the conversation, but when you come to the conversation, so this is something I learned in communication class is, um, when you come at someone saying like, "Hey, I want the best for both of us, and I want to, um, I want friendship. I want equality. I want a relationship. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that, I have some questions that um, will help us in this relationship, and they may be hard questions, but if I know the end goal is that you want to build a bridge, then that helps me to say, let's go, let's do it. But if I feel like you just want to um, just prove a point, you know what I mean? Then it's like, well, I
No.
don't want to waste my time.
Yeah. If you're
You
looking
know?
if you're looking to fight that traumatized person, now is
Yeah,
not the time to do that. And
yeah,
now is the time to check yourself. If that's
yeah.
really, I think that's one thing that someone said to me. I think it was actually you said this to me. It's like now, like, check yourself, because like
Yeah.
now is not the time, and it's never really been the time to
Right.
fight a black person about the racism that they've experienced,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
especially if you're coming from a place of privilege,
Right.
right? And so, like, I think that's good. I think breaching that subject is good, and I think that, like, ultimately, it's 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 gonna cost people being friends with people and people that look different than them, and understanding different things. And I think um, that's something that, if I'm being honest, white people could do a better job of. That's
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that's just the reality of it. I have another question here,
Yeah. Go ahead.
regarding PTSD. So here we go. PTSD is defined as post traumatic stress disorder. It
Yeah.
develops after a very stressful, frightening, or distressing event, or after a prolonged traumatic experience.
Hmm.
Do you think it's fair to say that many black Americans live most of their lives with some level of PTSD from the anxiety of always being suspect and experiencing prejudice daily?
Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, like when I think about PTSD, I think about people who, in the military, they went away, to another country, and like they're maybe in a war or in
Mm-hmm.
some like really, maybe some different combative type of situations, and based on what they've seen, they get diagnosed with PTSD and the trauma that comes with what they've seen, and they get the mental attention that they need. Um, well, black people have experienced that for years, and I'll even be honest and talk about this, even with the gang issue and inner city Americas, we see a lot of our friends die, a lot of them. I mean, I have so many friends who are no longer here, relatives who are no longer here, um, and it takes a toll on you. You know what I mean? And just the inner city, the black experience is, it takes a toll, and I think that's something that hasn't been addressed in our communities, and I think that a lot of times we see the repercussions of that not being dealt with. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of talk about mental health in the black
Right.
community, and a lot of that comes with the black experience, um, and what that brings. And I just kind of want to make this disclaimer because I know I brought up gang issues, and I know one of the arguments tend to be in dealing with like police brutality. Well, what about gangs? Like, what about black on black crime? Like, I hear that a lot. Um, and one thing, and this is kind of switching to a different subject, but I want to make this clear
Okay.
before I can move on. Um, we there's crime everywhere in every community. There's white on white crime. There's Asian on Asian crime. There's Mexican on Mexican crime. Um, but it's just because of once again going back to the whole systemic issue. Um, what's been portrayed in the media, what I mean, it has been the black on black issue. And some of that has been our own fault, in the things that our culture tends to glorify, and I will be honest about that. Um, but one thing about that is we in a black community we speak up about that all the time. There's programs created to prevent um, those things from happening within our own communities or within amongst ourselves. um, the program that I have, Real Teams, I mean, if you really look at it, it is a prevention program. It gives kids in our community a safe space to be and to give them, an identity. Um, and there's so many programs, after school programs. We've marched, we hit the corners, and we've preached, about the violence within our community. But here's what I want people to understand: the difference is. Um, if a blood in our community shoots a Crip in our community, the blood is going to prison. No questions asked. If a Crip shoots a blood, then the Crip is going to prison. No questions asked. So the issue is not that. The issue is that when police shoots an unarmed black person, um, there's no prison. There's no justice that is happening.
Right.
Um, and because of that, we have to take a stand. We have to say that things need to be fair, things need to be equal, and we need justice. Just like you hand us over justice when we commit crimes, and rightfully so, they need to hand over justice to those who also commit crimes against us. So I just kind of want to put that out there so people could understand that. But in dealing with the whole PTSD, we deal with a lot of my whole experience
Yeah.
has been traumatic. What I mean, I'm still dealing with effects of that. Even today, when I drive down the street, if I see a cop 2 cars behind me, I'm trying to get away from him.
Right.
I'm trying to get into the other lane. I'm looking for the nearest gas station or liquor store to turn into, so I don't have to have this interaction. Is that there's a lot of anxiety that comes with that, and not because I've done something wrong. It's just because I don't know where this interaction can go, and I just don't want to deal with it. You know what I mean? Because I don't know if
Right.
he's having a bad day. You know what I mean? He may come at me with the worst attitude, and um, that may set me off. And now we have this bad interaction, and who knows what happens from that. So and I'm 38 years old. I'm a grown man, but
Yeah.
there's still that level of anxiety, even what I mean, when everything in my car is legit. My license, insurance, everything is
Right.
registration is legit. Um, I just don't know what this interaction can turn into, and I would just rather not deal with it. So, but it has not been addressed, and people have not been diagnosed, and we have not got the help and resources that we need as a community to heal.
Yeah, I think, I mean, as you're describing all this and you're describing everything, I think, my mind connects dots, right? And it's just, I'd imagine, maybe you're in a situation where, uh, maybe you're in a situation where you didn't have a father who could have the talk with you, right?
Hmm.
And now you're kind of having to deal with the trauma of uh, having to figure out that there's people against you just for the way you were born, right?
Right.
And you're I'd imagine, like, okay, so now this is your background, right? You didn't have someone who, like a father figure, so to speak. You're
Yeah.
figuring this all out for the first time, and now you have an interaction with the cops, and you're dealing with this PTSD that you may or may not know you're dealing with. You lash
Hmm.
out. It's an accident, right? Like, it's you didn't have anyone coaching and instructing and helping
Yeah.
you out, and now,
Right.
all because of the circumstances you were born into, and the way, and
Yeah.
you not being young and immature, not knowing how to deal with it, right? But now there's this prejudice against you that you're angry about, and et cetera, et cetera. And now death is one of the consequences. Then
Mm.
that just hurts.
Yeah.
And like juvenile or juvie is one of the consequences of
Yeah.
me just leaving school early, maybe even
Yeah.
completely excused. Like,
Yeah.
like whatever that is, like, that just doesn't seem right. And now,
Yeah.
and now there's this, and I could see this prolonged PTSD, this prolonged traumatic experience of having to deal with it. That's hard. And
Yeah.
I think that's super. That's, I mean, that's, my heart breaks because, like, it's something that I've said is, you shouldn't be going for a run, and even if you're suspected, even if you're guilty of thievery, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or if you are, uh, even if you're guilty of being a counterfeiter, you know,
Right.
like, whatever. Even if you're guilty of these things, like, for me, as if I was a white person, I would at least be able to go to trial,
Yeah. Yeah.
and, like, the fact that you have to live under this burden, this traumatic burden of, like, I might not get to see judge and jury, like, that's hard.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's so complex, man. It's
yeah,
like, even as you're talking about the fatherlessness, I'm one of the few in a inner city community who had the benefit of growing up with a father in the home. You if you get a room full of black kids and ask you get a room full of 20, say, black kids, and you ask them how many grew up without a father, the majority of that room is going to raise their hand. The large majority. And the fathers are absent from the home, and it's a lot of reasons for that, and a lot of those reasons are systemic issues, and going back to the mass incarceration
all right,
um, that I kind of talked about.
all the way
But
back to
but
Jim
fathers
Crow.
are, yeah, right, yeah. But fathers give their sons identity. You know what I mean?
Right,
They let them know who they are and who they're not. So think about all these kids who have not been given an identity by a father, who have to now go out into the streets and find an identity. And they look for love, they look for acceptance, and the first place they find it is on the streets. You know what I
right,
mean? Around this group, a group of kids who also didn't have fathers to give them identity. And so it's so complex, and because they have this like lack of identity, and they look for that identity amongst their friends. They look for that acceptance and that respect amongst their friends. And sometimes that takes them doing things that they are not supposed to do to get that validation. Um, so
Man.
it's just complex, and um, it's a frustrating issue, and that's one of the reasons why real teams exist. You know, I want to
Yeah.
the mission of real teams is to present youth with an opportunity to discover an identity, a new identity in Christ. That's one of the things that I discovered when I first came to Christ at the age of 16, 11th grade in high school. I had an identity crisis going from a private school to Lincoln High School. You know, when I got to Lincoln,
Yeah.
I had an identity crisis. Um, you know, I knew that, you know, gangs and things like that wasn't the way to go, because I did have a father who I knew wasn't about that life and wasn't about me being about that life, and, you know, was strict in that regard. But I struggled in who I was supposed to be. And it wasn't until I gave my life to Christ that I realized my identity and realized that even those who were around me that, you know, did go into these different type of lifestyles, they were searching for identity too. Um, and, and so that's why real teams exist, to help. You know, I understand what the demographic and what happens with the fatherlessness. I've seen it time and time again. So I want to help bridge the gap with that identity and help them to
Yeah.
understand who they are. Um, and but that's a whole another issue that just kind of plays its part in this whole system and whole scheme of things.
It's incredibly
Um,
complex, and I would love to talk to you
sure.
more about this. You know, we're almost 2 hours into an interview. Like, holy smokes! Like, I think obviously that's this isn't me shutting it down.
No, no,
You could talk all day if you want. I also know you have a
no, no.
family.
We're good. Thank you,
We
though.
have another. I have another question from the chat, and you know, if there's
Sure.
more questions, please put them out. Again, this is James with Real Teens and Urban Youth Collaborative, and just overall a good guy. Um,
Thank you.
and but here's a question from the chat. So I mean, sorry, to the chat. If you have any other questions, please post them. Um, but are you aware? So James, are you aware of any laws currently, or what laws currently are hurting African Americans?
Um, I think who was the law that I think just passed? Most of them, for me, deals with like how we're being policed.
Okay.
I know the whole racial profiling thing. Um, that was dealt with. I forgot the exact law that was put into place that went against racial profiling. I know there was a law against the use of force in regards to police that black people were suffering from the most. Um, and this was after Stephon Clark was murdered in, I want to say, Oakland or Northern California by the police when he just had a cell phone in his hand. There was a law that was changed in California that allowed stricter rules for using deadly force.
Okay.
Um, I mean, it's so many. I mean, it's kind of hard to just um, point out one. I think it's more than just laws. I think it's just how a lot of things are played out, um, just in our current system.
Yeah, and I think that's a it's a tricky question, right? Because
Yeah.
obviously, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong. Please correct me if I'm
Mhm.
wrong.
Yeah.
But it's almost. I mean, it is about the laws, and that's part of the equation, obviously. But it's also
Mhm.
not about the laws. It's the
Yeah.
execution of,
Yeah.
I realize how terrible of a word that is to use, but it's how those laws are applied, right?
Yeah.
It's how
Yeah.
those laws are are used, right? And how like, even if there's laws, everything in the world, right, isn't black and white,
Hmm.
right? And it's how the
Right.
gray area is applied, right?
Right.
And you feel like the gray area, right, the areas of grace. I read a story of a sheriff, I think it was, in El Cajon just a couple days ago, and you know, at 2 in the morning, he, uh, he found some kids that were tagging something, right, or starting to tag something, and he stopped them and was like, "Hey, like, what are you doing?" He talked to them, and they were like, "Oh, I realize this isn't the place to tag." The sheriff says, "Why don't we go to one of the let's go to a place that's a safe place to go tag, and I will go and paint with you." Right?
Right.
And like, to me, I go, like, I read that story and I was like, one, I was thankful, right?
Yeah.
Because those African American brothers, those Black American brothers, could have easily been in jail that night, right?
Yeah. Easily.
And
Yeah.
and I kind of left reading that story confused, because on one hand they were breaking the law. They had started spray painting in a spot they shouldn't have, right?
Right.
But here's a cop, an enforcer of the law, or a sheriff, the enforcer of the law, who uh, who had an opportunity to apply the law differently,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And he gave grace, and the story ends up awesome, where the next day the cop, or the sheriff, or the law enforcement, we'll say, the officer, uh, met up with these, I think it was two or three black guys, and they went to a place where they could paint and could use cans of spray paint and those types of things.
Yeah.
Um, and I and they painted a mural for talking about the things that are going on in America today. Um,
Nice.
and to me, that goes like, man, so it is up to someone. Someone is making the decision to use discretion in the application of these laws, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And I
Yep.
think that's the tricky part, right? Where it's like the things that are biased against you are not biased against, say, the cops who stayed on the neck of George Floyd for 2.5 extra minutes, right? Like
Right.
like that is hard.
Right. And I think you're exactly right. Um, so I remember how I was kind of talking about, me driving and that police officer being two cars behind me. We wanted to get out the way because I don't know how that cop is doing today. He could be having a bad day and he can take that out on you, or he can be
Right.
super nice and be like, "Hey, I pulled you over because you did this or that. But it's all good. Just don't do it again, and just be careful next time. You know what I mean?
Right.
So a lot of a lot of what happens is, like you said, it's not so much about the laws, but um, how police use their authority, and sometimes they abuse their authority, and sometimes they just do things because they just have the authority to do it.
Right.
Um, and those kids could have easily, been caught by another cop who could have said like, "Okay, you guys are going to juvenile hall because you guys are spray painting, where you're not
Right.
supposed to." But then you had this other cop on the other hand who showed grace. In the case of George Floyd, um, had that been another cop, or maybe had he had a better day, I don't know. But that could have been totally different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he didn't have to use that type of force, but because the law is behind him and he knows that the law will back him up in his police practices, he did that, but he didn't have to do that. Um, and so that's kind of a lot of what goes on is um, police using their authority how they want, depending on how they're doing that day. You know what I mean? And a lot of times we get the bad end of the stick because they're having a bad day, and and we're not treated fairly as others. I just read a story the other day about um a white guy, Asian guy, and a black guy who were both arrested, and the bail for the um black guy is like $500, and this is all for the same crime, around the same time for the same crime. The black guy's bail was like $500. The Asian guy's was like 300, and the white guy was like 100. You know what I mean? Like, why is there a difference when they all did the same thing? You know what I mean? So it just goes back to the application of laws and how those are in authority want to use those laws when they don't have to, and how they use it against certain people and don't apply it the same for others. Um, so that's a lot of what that issue comes down to.
I think back at a time in my life um, where it was strange, or not strange. The circumstances don't matter. Basically, over the course of 2 weeks, I got pulled over 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, um, and here I am, a white guy. I was driving a purple '95 Ford Ranger. This isn't like, so to give you the context. Like,
Right.
it wasn't like I'm driving a race car out there,
Right.
being belligerent or anything like that. And I think about those that week, and even how I told people about that instance, at the time, where it's like, man, I got pulled over again. No tickets. I got 0 tickets for four of those times, right?
Wow. Wow.
Like I got, and I think about that, and I'm like, man, like
That's
James
crazy.
probably would have had a very different experience,
I would have had 4 tickets.
right?
I
Like,
would have had 4 court appearances.
right? Like,
Yeah.
that's just a very very different reality, and I think, I think that's a really interesting point, and I think that's part of what is the discussion right now, is that we uh, it's the application of the laws, right? Two of the
Yeah.
things that I got pulled over for, one was, well, literally one of them was because it looked like my front left tire was underinflated, right? So it was like a petty thing, right? But
Wow.
like, I
Yeah.
didn't get a fix-it ticket for it,
Oh wow.
and
Yeah.
I imagine in that type of situation, you would probably be more likely to get a fix-it ticket, and I think that
Right.
that's part of the situation, where
Yeah.
it's not that there's a law against having underinflated tires, right? It's
Right.
not that there's a that, like, it's not a problem with the fact that the cops can pull people over, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact of what happens after that moment, right?
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
um,
I've been pulled over for the the lights of the license plates being out. Like, like the light, not the tail light, not the brake light, but the light that shines on the license
I need
plate.
to ask you a question, because in that time when
Yeah.
I got pulled over 4 times, that was one of the things that I got pulled over and told about. Did you get a ticket for that?
I got to fix the ticket. Yeah.
Because I did not get a fix-it ticket for that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and that isn't to like spread division. That's
Yeah.
simply to help give perspective in those moments, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, it's. I think that was a hard obstacle for me to get over at one point in my life, which was
Hmm.
just like, look, we're getting pulled over for the same things,
Right.
but I didn't realize, like even it's a hassle just to like deal with a fix-it ticket, right? It's a
Oh yeah.
hassle to do that. Like, just
Yep.
having to live with that extra hassle is difficult. Like,
Yeah. That's it. This takes time. You got to go. First, you got to go fix the issue. Then you got to go find a cop to sign off on it. Then you got to go to court and prove that it's been signed off by an officer. And it's just it's irritating. You know what I mean? And it's time consuming, and it costs you money because even um, when you go to court and get it signed off, you got to pay the fee to you know what I mean to
to park
just for
there.
being seen in court.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's irritating.
Okay, so we got some other questions in here that are coming in. So, we'll try to move through these well. Um, what role this I see? I read this and I see kind of two questions here. So if we have to take it apart, we can. Um, so here's a question to you. What role can or should the church in America play in the fight for equality? What and
That's
then
a good question.
So that's the first one. That's the first question. The second part of this question is, what does it look like on a local church body level? So I'm hearing like individual churches, right?
Hmm.
What does it look like on a local church body level, particularly in less diverse church bodies? So here's the question: how can the church, capital C, all churches, right, fight for equality in America, or should we even do that? And then, if yes, or how can we do that in smaller bodies? How can we do that in uh, in local churches, especially ones, particularly ones that are less diverse.
Hmm. So for the first question, how can the church get involved?
Or do you even want the church involved?
Absolutely, the church
Okay.
should definitely be involved. But and, I was on a call with a group of clergy a couple of days ago, and it was like maybe 30 of us, and a lot of them were white clergymen. Um, and then we had to get into these breakout sessions and ask like, who should we be right now? What should we do in light of this as a body? So when we got to our breakout group, I answered first, and I was like, man, I'm ready just to go. I'm ready to march. I'm ready. I think we have to make a statement. We have to uh, make sure that we're out in the forefront fighting for justice. And me as an action oriented person, like I just kind of want to, get my hands dirty and like be the change I want to see. But then there was another perspective, another black guy chimed in. It's like I hear that and I appreciate that, but I don't think it's our job to fight.
Mm-hmm.
As black people, I feel like we fought long enough and we fought hard enough, and um, the white church hasn't fought, and they know what's going on, but they just don't want to get uncomfortable and possibly lose some of their positions of privilege and things like that. But they know what they need to do, and they just need to do it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that it was like a aha moment for me. Like, you're right. It's like we have. I mean, like, been yelling for the last 400 years, even with the civil rights movement. The black church took the forefront of that. Um, but we still see issues today, and I think largely because the white church hasn't said anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not just the white church, but just white America. You know what I mean in general, um, but especially with the white church, because I know if anyone can understand or empathize with the plight of black people is the church.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's what our faith is about: is standing up for the oppressed and bearing one another's burdens. Um, and so it's I think the white church should take the forefront of this, because they have the privilege to do so. They have the economic power and resources and connections with the people up top who have the ability to change things and make things happen. And I think when um, they take the lead on it, not saying do all the work, but take the lead on it and be the main voices saying we want change. I think that's when change will begin to happen. Um, I think that's what needs to happen, and I think if that happens, that will make a huge change. Because there's a lot of, even in like some of the groups, the men groups that I'm a part of, with a lot of businessmen, I see a lot of people in these groups who have tons of money and has tons of political influence and I mean, things like that. And if these are the ones who are speaking out against these injustices against their black brothers and sisters, and they will be heard. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we've been yelling for the last 400 years, and we just have it continues to fall on deaf ears. Um, so I think that's where the change starts and
Okay.
happens is with the white church. On a local level, I just think getting involved with the local police departments and and just like getting on and being a part of the process of holding them accountable. I
Okay.
think if church members can be a part of, for one, understanding the issues with you know police in regards to the black community, and being some of the ones who are um, holding the police accountable for some of their practices. I think that helps a whole lot. But just as a body. just having more conversations like this. I mean, where black and white churches are coming together and having these type of dialogues and getting to know each other and helping them to understand just some of the personal experiences that we've dealt with as black people in this country, and helping them to understand what it feels like to be a black man or black woman in America. Um, I feel like the local church can. I think it'll help the local church a great deal by being willing to have those conversations.
So let me make sure that I'm hearing right, and then I have a follow up question that I think could help figure some things out. So,
Yeah.
on a nationwide level, right? Um, you want, or what you're hoping for is that white people start getting in the fight
Yeah.
on
Absolutely.
behalf of black people,
And not getting in the fight, but leading the fight.
leading the fight. Okay, so like,
Leading. The fight.
so you're not necessarily calling for the next Martin Luther King. You're calling for white people to be the Martin Luther King, right? Like that
Absolutely.
figure, so to speak. Not to speak
Absolutely.
disrespectfully. Um,
No, no.
uh, the other part of it is I'm hearing that on the local level, like engage in these conversations um, and welcome people, welcome the black voice, and stand for
Yeah.
the black voice
Yeah.
in you said specifically in police departments and those types of circles, but I mean, I think also just even in our own circles, right? Would you agree with that too? Like, like talk to black people and then hope for and push for that change, in our families and our friend groups, like
Yeah.
engage these types of things.
Yeah.
Um, okay, I have a
Yeah. Definitely.
here's a follow up question to that. How? So I think that that's part of where we're moving forward towards is as I see my white people friends start to change a little bit in how they're posting on Facebook, how they're
Hmm.
doing some of these different things. Um, I guess let me frame it this way. Pretend like you and I have never had this conversation. We have a new friendship, right? And I'm
Hmm.
a white person who hasn't posted anything on social media, didn't change my profile picture to a black square, like, hasn't done any of those what I would consider very little things, right?
Hmm.
To show support for the black community in America. Um,
Hmm.
what would you and it's not just on social media, but like
Yeah. Yeah.
when my family's talking about it, I have a hard time bringing it up, right? Or I have a hard time calling them out, or whatever that is. How can that individual, that person who knows God's grace and God's love, right, who understands and is uh, and wants to be an ally, what are some of the first steps that would make you go, cool, I can talk to this guy, I can help shape them, I can help, like I can work with this person even if they're completely oblivious or whatever to what's going on, right? Like what are some of those very first steps that you would like to see, maybe from an individual church member, a white church member that wants to start stepping up to the plate, or
Um.
maybe even a white high schooler, like that wants to start stepping up to the plate.
That's I think the first thing. So what I would want to see from you, or how can it start?
Yeah, like if someone needs to get started, right?
I think it will start with um. I think it'll start with reaching out to someone who you may be friends with on Facebook, and
Okay.
you see posting, reaching out to them maybe in the inbox saying, "Hey, I'm with you." You know what I mean? And I just want to understand. You know what I mean? So I feel like for a lot of people, especially for me at least, just knowing that someone cares says a lot. You
Okay.
know what I mean? Just taking that step towards saying, I stand with you, and I know you're hurting, and I may not understand everything that is going on, but I'm willing to listen and learn. So I think that's the first step, and I think the first way of maybe getting involved, it may be inviting that black person to your church to have a conversation with some of your members or to talk with
Hmm.
your youth, just so that they can understand um, just the personal experiences, um, and I think being um, intentional about even you as that leader having conversations from of what you're learning to your own uh, youth group or whatever that may be. Um, so I think um, just opening up the space and opening up the place for conversation to happen is the first way of getting involved, or the first way of making it happen, or what I'll say for maybe a youth, maybe a white youth who wants to learn more. I think where you can start is by maybe going to one of your black friends, people who you built a relationship with, and saying, hey, how do you feel in regards to everything that's going on, and
Yeah.
and making it clear that I don't have an opinion in this matter. I literally just want to hear from you and want to hear like
Right.
what you're going through and what you're experiencing. Um, and I think that's the first level. And I think there's so many ways to get involved. Maybe marching, maybe going to a march um, with your black brother or black sister and saying, hey, are you going to any peaceful protests today? I mean, I want to go with you and march alongside of you. Um, I mean, that's making a statement.
Right.
What I mean, or even making a statement on social media by saying, hey, what I mean, I'm gonna join and I'm gonna make my profile picture black just to stand in solidarity with you. Um, so I think it can be just as simple as that, but it could also get pretty complex as well.
Hmm. I have a friend.
Hopefully, I answered that right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, there's a lot of there's a lot to digest here, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the things, I mean, you see it on. I saw one of my friends posted it. Is he's like, look, there's a lot of fronts to this. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of lanes, so to speak. Just get in a lane and start moving, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think what you said was really important um, was just say, hey, I want to know.
Mm-hmm.
Like showing that desire is big. I want to ask you this: if you think that it's, if a friend of mine told me this, again, a black friend of mine told me this, is he's like, I just want to see you trying.
Mm. Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
absolutely. I think one of the worst things that can happen is just to be indifferent
Right.
and just to act like nothing is going on. You know what I mean? Like, I want to say Dr. King had a quote. I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but he said, "In the end, we will not remember the voices of our enemies, but the silence of our friends."
Mm-hmm.
And we want to know that people are in our. We want to know where people stand. I think that's what a lot of it is. Like, where do you stand? Especially for me as someone who has a lot of white friends, because I've been in a lot of white circles within ministry,
Right.
and I'm really puzzled, honestly, to see a lot of them being um, indifferent and not having anything to say. I would rather know that you're on the other side, you know what I mean, than to
Right.
not know where you stand. You know what I mean? Because at least if I know that you're on the other side and you disagree with everything that I'm doing, or you disagree with the whole movement, at least I know where you stand and I know how to move and address you, and you know what I mean, how to
Yeah.
go in relation to you. But to not hear nothing is like, do you even care? You know what I mean? Um, and that silence from a lot of my a lot of white people that I know, um, to see them being so silent about this issue, but they were very vocal about protesting to reopen San Diego.
Ugh.
You know what I mean? But have nothing to say on this. It kind of makes me wonder exactly where you're at. I kind of feel like I know where you're at. You know what I mean? And um, but but just to say, hey, I see you, or hey, I'm here for you. Hey, I care. You know what I mean? Hey, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Just something as simple as that makes a world of difference, and that has made a world of difference with me and a lot of my white friends. A lot of people reaching out to me, saying like, "Hey, man, I'm here with you. I don't understand everything, but I'm willing to learn." Um, that speaks volumes, and I think that's where the change begins.
That's that's got to be hard, and maybe I would love to have you on again so that we can talk more about these things.
Yeah.
Um, and it's probably not the right time right now, but I'd also love to hear your heart and what you would say the black community's heart is towards people changing their minds, right? Like
Mhm.
maybe they're and if you want to go into this can of worms, great. You don't have to, and this is
Yeah.
extra, but like maybe there's a person who's all lives matter, right? Or people are talking about Black
Mhm.
Lives Matter, and they want to talk about another lives matter, right? And like those kinds of
Right. Yeah.
things, and like from my experience, like say whether it's Drew Brees, right? He kind of came out and was like, but it's about the flag,
Yeah.
and then he came out and apologized and was very and like clarified a lot of things, and but he kind of um you know there's
Yeah.
people who are still having to learn this, and like they might not even realize some of the racism that they engage with,
Mhm.
and that shapes them as a person. But
Yeah.
like I think that that's part of it, is that a lot of white America is still trying to sort it out, and I think Drew Brees might be an example of that, where he was like, I'm this way, but then clearly people talked to him about it, in some way,
Yeah.
shape, or form, and he was like, I'm sorry, like,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
and I think that for a lot of white America, there's a lot of people who are dealing with this kind of for the first time,
Yeah.
and as having to sort out like what their stances are, like what do I do, how do I do this, where do I even think on this, I
Right.
like I'm almost positive that there are people who I'm not almost positive, I know that there's people I know that have not let Jim Crow and that whole era of American history affect them,
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
and I think that that's part of it, is looking into these things. We have another question, um, and I hope that answers the question. I think also like it's an ongoing conversation too, right? Things
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
changing all the time, and there's different ways in which different people can step up. And I think
Yeah.
one of the things that you said was like a gut shot, was like, man, if you were willing to protest against COVID-19 quarantine stuff, but you
Yeah.
weren't willing
Yeah.
to go and walk, for Black Lives,
Right.
like
Right.
you might need to check yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's just like like this both of those things. Like if you see the COVID-19 quarantines as a issue, right?
Right.
As a American rights issue,
Right.
Black Lives Matter is an American rights issue as well.
Absolutely.
Let that affect
Absolutely.
you, right? And
And
that's
even
kind of
in
part
that
of our
vein,
extra conversation that's coming in, creeping in here for a sec. But
yeah, in that vein, I was down there last Sunday at a protest downtown, um, and the way the police meet with us, like they come with the riot gear, they come like 30, 40, 50 cars deep, speeding, to the protest, and get out with the riot gear, bring the National Guard with them with their guns pointed at us, and um, so even our right to protest is taken away. You know what I mean? But that didn't happen with when they were protesting to reopen San Diego to get a haircut. You know what I mean?
yeah,
The police didn't meet them and engage them in the same way. So it's like, dang, do we what rights do we have here in America? You know what I mean? And then you mentioned Drew Brees and the whole flag thing. Um, he failed to realize that Kaepernick and the black community's protest was never about the flag. It was never about disrespecting the flag. It was about really doing what the flag gives us the right to do, which is protest. And it was all about police brutality and using that form as a national form to bring attention to it. It wasn't, I hate this flag and I hate America. No, there's an issue that we want to bring attention to, and this is a good way for you guys all to see it. But back then they made it about the flag, and then Drew Brees, when he made his comment, he made it about the flag, and it has never been about the flag. You know what I mean? So that kind of, and that's where, he just failed to understand. When you think that he would understand, being in the locker room with a lot of black people, especially in Louisiana, you would think that he would understand that, but he clearly didn't.
Well, I think you'd be encouraged to hear he did back up, and he did redefine, and I think that and this is another conversation for another day, but there seems to be some really good news coming out of the NFL regarding these things recently. So that's great. We could talk about that later. We have another question here
go ahead.
that I want to get to, and I think well, I won't comment on it for right now. We'll just see how it sits.
Mm-hmm.
Police have 375 million encounters each year. There's a total of 1,004 people killed by police in 2019. How does this show systematic racism?
Okay, now read that question one more time. I heard it, but I just want to make sure
it's loaded.
Yeah.
Okay, police have 375 million encounters each year. There is a total of 1,004 people killed by police in 2019. How does this show systematic racism?
Well, it shows systematic racism because when the police kill an unarmed, innocent black person, there's no consequences for it. There's no justice that's had. And it's funny. I was watching that little girl talk to her parents about police brutality, and a little white girl, and her parents were so against it, and the little white girl was like just showing how racist this country is, and the mom threw out a statistic talking about it was like, I want to say like 400 white people killed by the police, and like around 200 black people killed by the police, and the mom thought she won the argument by throwing out that statistic, but then the daughter had to help her understand that the white population is about 76%, when you have the black population at like 13%. So for those numbers to even be close shows that black people are getting killed like 3 times the rate of white people, at a much higher rate than white people by the hands of cops. So the issue is that there's never any justice. For one, the way we are policed, for one, and the racial profiling and the bias that already exists just because we're black. But then when someone does get killed, a black person does get killed without cause, and it's proven that there's no just cause for them to be killed, they don't have a weapon, they're in handcuffs, or whatever the case is, there's no consequences or repercussions for those officers. Do you realize that Tamir Rice, the kid in, I want to say, was it Cleveland? 12-year-old kid, playing with like a toy gun. Someone called the police and said, "Hey, there's a kid out here playing with a gun," and I believe they also said it might be a toy or a BB gun, but he's playing with a gun. Police pulled up, and in less than 2 seconds, they shot and killed him without just get out the car and shoot. And they shot and killed this 12-year-old kid. There was no convictions. There was no repercussions for those cops. They didn't get convicted and go to jail. You know what I mean? So the systematic thing is that there's no justice for black people killed at the hands of cops. No one's being sentenced. No one's facing consequences besides a leave of absence, or maybe getting fired or going to desk duty. You know what I mean? But there's no justice that ever happens for black people. So when we say police brutality and systematic racism and our cry for justice, we're crying for police to be held accountable for their actions when everyone knows that they were wrong. They should be held
Yeah.
accountable, and they're not being held accountable.
And we're talking about a 12-year-old kid. Like, like growing up, I got to used to play with cap guns. You know,
Right.
like those types of things. That sounds like almost a death sentence for a black person. You know, like
Yeah.
I could go to the store, buy a roll of this paper roll of like caps,
Hmm.
that would make a little popping sound and whatever, and you had a gun that would make that popping sound, and like that was a toy for me.
Right.
To you, that's like, like I'd imagine for you and for your kids, you'd be like, don't even play with that.
Yeah. Oh no.
Like
No.
that's asking for trouble.
Yeah. 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 We play with colorful Nerf guns,
Yeah,
and we play in a safe environment. You know what I mean? A
right.
place that
You
is
play that
close to home.
inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like when we're looking at this too. Back to what you were saying about the numbers, right? We had someone in chat said of those 1,004 people killed, 2.6 times more Black Americans were killed than white, per the percentage of Americans that are Black, 13%, or white,
Hmm.
73%. So it's like
Yeah.
one, like that points to exactly what you're talking about too. Like the
Yeah.
numbers support the
Yeah.
fact that you, right, that
Hmm.
you as a black man, um, are being targeted more.
Yeah.
But then the flip side of that too is like, I think the question when they say systematic racism or systemic racism, I think that part of what we had talked about even at the beginning of the conversation was look, when we're talking about consequences, right? When we're talking about the application of the justice system, right?
Hmm.
That's where things, uh, that's where things are, uh, a problem, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
because on top of this, like if to whoever to Better Burger 2020, the person who asked this question, that's how Twitch works. To Better
Hmm.
Burger 2020, I would say look up the most recent public one, but look up Breonna Taylor and
Oh man.
and tell me that's one of your 1,004 people, right?
Yeah.
And tell me how that's right.
Yeah.
And that's not the only story of
Yeah.
of police shooting first and asking questions later, and
Both of them,
then
Gene.
yep.
The, yeah.
um
Police went inside the wrong apartment, off duty, and and shot and killed this guy because she thought someone was in her apartment when it was clearly not her apartment.
right,
And and I don't know what the consequence for that was, but I know it didn't fit the crime.
right. And like that's the type of thing that I think James is talking about is like I don't think anyone is questioning. Let's say it's a hostage situation. Let's say it's um let's say like there's the situation where someone is like thoroughly uh threatening people, taking bodies and those types of things. I don't think anyone is saying like kind of the things that we see on the screen, right, that we see in movies, maybe I'm going to start killing hostages every 20 minutes, type of
Right.
thing, like that type of stuff. Like
Mhm.
I don't think that anyone is protesting the use of lethal force if someone is using or threatening lethal force.
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
things that we're talking about here are
Yeah.
someone going for a run, someone sitting in their house, and
Yeah.
someone using a $20 bill. I've had a $20 bill that was counterfeit. I didn't know it. I
Hmm.
don't remember how I got it and like whatever, right? But it was counterfeit, and I the cops don't know about it because the cops weren't looking at me. They're okay, sorry,
Right.
whatever. That was just whoever at the supermarket or whatever where I tried to use it. Um,
Right.
like that's what we're talking about here, and that's like we need to let that settle in, and we like as again a white pastor in America, like those are the types of things we need to settle in because this isn't an issue of uh, proper justice being applied.
Right.
This is an issue of one the systemic things that have made it so that the systemic things in American history that has made it difficult to be a black man, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like we look at, you know, my son's name, for example, is Lincoln, because I think Abraham Lincoln, I respect that guy,
Mm-hmm.
because of what he did for black people. Unfortunately, he was killed and wasn't able to continue fighting for black rights and those types of
Mm.
things, because if you read what happened afterwards, I mean, things that happened to black congressmen, like the number of assassinations that happened from 1865 to 1900 to black people is daunting. Read
Mm.
that, look that up, like,
Mm.
and like those types of things. The 3/5 rule would be another example, like those types of things. But what James was
Mm.
saying was that it's the application and the consequences,
Yeah.
right? Like if you went to if you shot someone, you're going to get charged for murder, right?
Sure.
And if you killed someone, you're going to get charged for murder appropriately and in the harshest way possible, right?
Yep.
We talk about like Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old kid, right? Like a 12-year-old kid literally doesn't know like like they don't know things. They're still in
Yes.
puberty. You know, like
Right.
things that we know
Right.
about, that you and I know about the world because of our age, right? Like he doesn't understand. Like that kid was
Right.
4 years from being able to get a job. You know, like,
Yeah.
and he would like those types of things. This kid is a 12-year-old, you know, and a kid trying to play in his front yard.
Right.
Like that's the type of thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I think that it's like it's important, right? And this is why we're having this conversation. And you know, like, and the point is, and Better Burger responded, was like, it's not right. There was prison for her. The cop that shot, you're gonna have to remind me his name, Botham Jean, I think is how he said
Uh-huh.
it. But
Yeah.
the cop that shot Botham Jean got prison time. But what I think you're saying is let's look into all these cases and let's pay
Right.
attention. How much prison time did she get? You know,
Exactly.
like it might have been 3-5 years. It could have been 10 years. But for you, it would
Right.
have been max sentence.
20 to life.
Right. You know, like those types of things. Like it's the application of these laws, right?
Exactly.
It's how
Exactly.
these things are working. I think of like there's that movie. I don't know if you've seen it, Just Mercy.
I have not seen it yet. I have
Um,
not seen it, and that's and partly it's because of trauma that will come with watching it. You know what I mean? Like, I want to watch it, but I kind of don't. You know what I mean? Because um, I just know how it would make me feel.
right.
You know what
No,
I mean?
and I think it's far more important for us as white people to watch it to get some more perspective. But like
Mhm.
that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. You know, it's
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
just not justice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, James, I really appreciate the conversation. We went long, and
That's
I
all
think
good. My pleasure.
and honestly, we are. This is just the start of a conversation. This is just the start of a lot of listening. Like, you know, like for me and for the people who are here watching, I want to create a culture. I want to harbor a culture of listening, right? Because you know the reality is this is 2 hours and 35 minutes so far that you and I have been on this call, and while that is a long time, that's not even scratching the surface
Mhm.
of the things that we need to talk about. And what I would love to invite you back. You know,
Yeah, I'd love to
I
come
would
back.
love to talk more with you about these things
Yeah,
and
for sure.
hear more of your voice and more of your perspective as we dive into these different things. I think that there's some really interesting exercises that we could do that will help people, not just white people, but people gain
Hmm.
perspective. And I think
Yeah.
that that's going to be one of the first changes is as we build relationships. You know, like once we can start gathering, I want you to come to Waypoint. Like I want you to come and talk to people.
Oh, definitely. I
Bring
would
your
love to.
youth. You know, like bring like
Yeah,
let's make it a thing, because I
yeah,
think that what we want to do is we want, and what now more than ever, white people are recognizing that a white bubble is not healthy. And now
mm,
more than ever, I think the church is recognizing that there's been a systematic or systemic problem in the past that we haven't really addressed, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
of all the voices that should be here, we should really be pointing people to the gospel, right? We should
yeah,
really like
absolutely.
the reality is that hearts need to change. White hearts need to soften towards other fellow image bearers
Hmm.
who are struggling, right?
Yeah,
And similarly, when it comes to again, there's a myriad of people here, but like similarly, it's a lot harder. I'd imagine it to be so. I've never been in this situation, but it's a lot harder to shoot someone when you have sympathy for them, right?
yeah,
Like
absolutely.
it's a lot harder to um to be complacent when you've let these stories affect us,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I think that when we see that this isn't a black, white, Asian, I mean, we even struggle with like the language of how to do this, right? Like we talk about you, like we want to say African American, right?
hmm,
But like,
yeah,
but like, but like, for Latino or Hispanic people, they're defined a little differently, right?
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
like for you, like we say Black America and Black Lives Matter and these types of things, like we have a hard time because it's like you're Americans, right?
right, yeah,
And we don't
yeah,
want it to be a skin color issue, but like at the same time we need to recognize that there's these differences and there's so many things to sort out.
yeah,
And I appreciate you coming on and just at least starting the conversation.
yeah.
Um,
And I appreciate you having me. I appreciate your willingness um, to have this dialogue. I really appreciate the fact that you reached out to me and wanted to have a conversation and hear more. And I wish there were more like you. You know what I mean? And I really do.
I'm hoping to help be one of I'm hoping to be one of those white voices that you're talking about.
So
And the reality is it's not to downplay anything, but it's frankly standing up for what God stands up for.
yeah.
And
And I want to throw out these two resources. Maybe these could be
yeah, that'd
two
be
good
great.
resources
Go for it.
um, for your youth or anyone listening. Two good books. One I've read already, called America's Original Sin. So this written by a white pastor named Tim Wise, who um, is very well versed in the systematic oppression that has happened to Black people in this country, and he talks about it, as a pastor and what the church needs to do in order to for one learn and hear what has happened and to see how it has happened. And he just gives so many facts and gives all the numbers and so many different stories. Um, so I think that's a really, really good resource.
Okay.
And then the next one is called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And she goes through, and I just really started reading that book, but so far I mean, it's so rich. Um, just how Jim Crow was, you know what I mean, back when it started, um, and how the mass incarceration has created a new Jim Crow with a different language, with a different kind of scope, but with a lot of the same exact results through
Right.
mass incarceration. Um, so those two books I really um, I highly recommend for those who want to kind of educate yourself more about the history of Black people in this country.
I appreciate it. I mean, we're
Absolutely,
always looking for resources, but one thing, if I can use a little bit of time to say something,
sure.
uh, white people watching this, it is up to us. It is up to us to take it upon ourselves to get educated. It is up to us to be affected by this. It is up to us to listen. Like, I, if I must say so, there's been times in all this where I've just been overwhelmed. It's like, I mean, we are, but thankfully we have the Lord, right? And we have the Lord to sustain us, uh, but it's up to us to go and look at these really uncomfortable things, and it is time for us to be uncomfortable more regularly.
Mm-hmm.
Period. And we need to be uncomfortable on behalf of our fellow Americans that happen to be a different skin color. But like, even if you need to go and watch a YouTube video on what melanin is, we're actually really all this colored by the same thing. So like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
like it's just how it is. So
Yeah.
like, we need to get uncomfortable. Like, read the stories. Talk to the people that need to be talked to. One thing that I would be careful of, and this is pastorally towards our youth that are here, be careful of cancel culture. Be careful of white people who frustrate you, so you're just done talking to them. Like, those are the people that white people need to talk to. Like, if you're like, man, I'm just tired of this person posting stuff that is against my black brothers, it's probably time for you to talk to them. It's time for us, like, we're the ones that need to have those conversations because, unfortunately, systemically, their voice is different to the people who are, their voice is not worth listening to the people who are prone to thinking differently and having a hard time struggling with Black Lives Matter. So, take some time, read a book, read an article, like, hear stories, and dive into this. So, and someone, yeah, I agree. Better Burger 2020 is posted again. He said he highly recommends Vadi Bakum. James, have you heard of Vadi Bakum?
Yeah. I have one of his books. Yeah.
Okay, I am a huge Vadi Bakum fan theologically, especially his teaching
Mm-hmm.
on family. But I've recently been watching even more and paying more attention to his teachings on race.
Mm-hmm.
He is great. He is sound. He is biblical.
Yeah.
So,
Solid.
I so um, look at these things, and let's be honest. Let's look at them in face of Scripture. Let's also look at them in face of the truth of what's happened in American history. James, we're gonna have you on again. I know you're a
But
busy man. You're tired. There's a lot of stuff. You're carrying a lot of weights. But I love you, and I love that you're going to the Lord, and that you're just like you're willing to have these hard conversations, and we want to have you again. We'll figure out a
yeah.
time and a place, and
Yep.
and I love you, man. We'll catch you later.
Love you too, man. Appreciate being on.
All right, see you, everybody. Next week. Sorry, I forgot to do one thing, James. I
Yeah.
need you to plug all your stuff. So on the Twitch, I have, I just use Instagrams because that basically starts the conversation for me. Um,
Right.
you can be found at James_Wiley_Jr. on
Yeah.
Instagram, or you can also find Real Teens,
Uh-huh.
with two E's _teens,
Yep.
on Instagram as well. Is there anywhere else to find you guys, or find you or your
Real
guys?
teams on Facebook.
Okay.
Um, and then if you want to learn more about us, you can go to our website, realteens.org,
Okay.
and just learn a little bit more about us. But yeah, all those handles are exactly it.
Excellent, excellent. Similarly, for anyone else who's in chat, follow us for more of this content. Join us in our community. We're still doing stuff with COVID. We're still doing stuff. If you have any questions, All of our Instagram, Facebook, website, email, all that stuff is on the Twitch as well. So, James, thanks again, and we'll do it again
My
sometime.
pleasure.
We'll
Thanks
catch
for
you
having
later.
me.